to another night of shadows and dreams with your old Uncle Grim. Come now, pull the blankets up close. Let the darkness be your comforting shroud. Tonight's tale. Tonight's is a special kind of dark. So, before we begin our descent, do an old man a favor. If you enjoy our little rendezvous with the night, press that little button to like this story, and perhaps subscribe so you never miss a tale. And in the quiet space below, tell me, where in this wide, weary world are you listening from tonight? It warms my cold heart to know how far the darkness spreads. Now, quiet. Let the rain be our metronome. Let the story begin. It begins, as so many stories in this particular city do, with the rain. Not a gentle spring shower, but a hard, percussive deluge. A Gotham City baptism. Each drop hits the grimy asphalt with a hiss, as if the very streets are in pain. The water runs in thick, oily rivulets down gutters choked with the city's refuse, carrying secrets and sins toward the black, churning mouth of the harbor. High above, perched on the leering face of a stone gargoyle, a figure sat, unmoving, becoming one with the storm. He was less a man and more a piece of the city's brutalist architecture. A silhouette carved from midnight and sorrow. The rain slicked his cowl, tracing the sharp, demonic points of his ears, and running down the scalloped edges of his cape, which hung, heavy and sodden, like the wings of a drowned bat. He wasn't waiting for a signal. Not really. He was simply listening to the city's tormented heartbeat, the distant scream of a siren, the closer, more intimate sound of a window shattering somewhere in the gloom below. This was his vigil, his penance. Tonight, however, the vigil had a destination, a purpose born of a creeping, gnawing unease that had settled deep in his gut. It was a feeling he had learned to trust over the long, brutal years. It was the feeling that a string, stretched with a silent, fluid movement, he launched himself from his perch, the cape catching the wind for a brief, glorious moment. A fleeting eclipse against the bruised purple sky. He fell, a controlled plummet, into the concrete canyons below, the wind whipping past him with a mournful howl. He was heading for the place where all the city's nightmares were given a name and a number. He was going to Arkham Asylum. The drive there was a blur of neon bleeding onto wet streets, of faceless people huddled under awnings, their expressions grim and defeated. The car he drove, a low black Predator, parted the traffic like a shark through a school of fish. It consumed the road, its engine a low growl that was felt more than heard. He didn't think about the mechanics of the drive. His hands and feet moved with an instinct born of 1,000 such nights. His mind was elsewhere. It was on a conversation he felt with a dreadful certainty was long overdue. He needed to try one last time, perhaps, to reach across the chasm that separated them, a chasm filled with laughter and blood, and try to find something, an end, not a victory, not a defeat, but an end to the dance. The asylum loomed out of the mist and rain, a Gothic horror of pointed spires and barred windows. It was a place built to contain madness, but it always felt to him as though its very stones were saturated with it, breathing it out into the damp night air. He cut the engine, and the sudden silence was profound, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain. He walked toward the main gate, his boots making no sound on the slick pavement. The guards, huddled and miserable in their booths, straightened up as he approached, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear.
They knew him.
The whole city knew him. He was the ghost, the creature of the night, the dark night. He was Batman. He didn't speak to them. He didn't need to. The heavy iron gates groaned open for him, a reluctant metal sigh. He passed through the manicured, deceptively peaceful gardens, where diseased-looking roses drooped under the weight of the rain. The front doors of the administration building were opened by a nervous-looking orderly. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of antiseptic, stale coffee, and a faint, underlying scent of human despair. The warden was waiting for him, a man named Dr. Reed, whose face was a roadmap of stress and exhaustion. Reed wrung his hands, a habit he couldn't seem to shake whenever the bat paid a visit. "He's been quiet," Reed said, his voice a little too loud in the echoing hall, almost serene. "Hasn't said a word in days, just sits there, playing cards. Batman said nothing, his gaze fixed on the long, sterile corridor that led to the maximum security wing. The silence pressed in on Reed. "I don't know what you expect to achieve by this," the doctor continued, more to himself than to his visitor. "He's beyond any kind of rational discourse. You know that better than anyone. I have to try." The voice that answered was a low, gravelly rasp, the sound of grinding stone. It seemed to absorb the light in the hallway. Reed flinched slightly at the sound of it. He led the way, his footsteps squeaking on the linoleum, a nervous counterpoint to the silent tread of the figure behind him. They passed cells where the damned of Gotham stared out with vacant eyes, or muttered endless, looping monologues to unseen companions. The air grew colder here, heavier. Finally, they reached the end of the hall. A single, reinforced door with a small, barred window. A guard, a large, impassive man named Frank, stood beside it. He nodded curtly at Batman. "He's been waiting for you," Frank said, his voice flat. Batman stepped up to the small window, peering into the stark, white-padded cell. Inside, a figure sat at a small metal table, his back to the door. He was thin, wiry, dressed in the standard Arkham jumpsuit. A deck of cards was spread out before him in a half-finished game of solitaire. The only color in the room was the shock of greasy, emerald green hair on his head. "Let me in," Batman said to the guard. Reed started to object, but a single, hard glance from the cowl silenced him. Frank shrugged and produced a keycard. The lock hissed and clicked, a series of complex, metallic sounds designed to keep the devil in his box. The heavy door swung inward. Batman stepped across the threshold, a black void entering a world of sterile white. The door closed behind him with a final, echoing boom. The rain outside seemed to intensify, lashing against the reinforced glass of the high, narrow window. The man at the table didn't turn around. He simply placed a red 7 on a black 8. His movements were slow, deliberate. "You know," Batman began, his voice low, "I've been thinking a lot lately about you, about me, about what's going to happen to us in the end." The figure at the table remained still, The only sound was the soft flick of a card being turned over from the deck. A king of spades. Useless. We're going to kill each other, aren't we? Batman continued, taking a hesitant step forward. Perhaps you'll kill me. Perhaps I'll kill you. Perhaps sooner. Perhaps later. I just wanted to talk. He paused, letting the weight of his words fill the small space. He was laying his soul bare, offering a truce in a war that had no rules. He was tired, bone-achingly tired of the cycle. I don't want to hurt you, he said, the admission costing him more than any physical blow ever could. I don't want either of us to end up dead. But we're running out of time. Maybe I can help. Maybe I can rehabilitate you. You don't have to be alone. We don't have to kill each other. He stood there, a titan in the shadows, offering a hand to his sworn enemy. He was met with absolute silence. The figure hadn't moved a muscle. A cold dread, colder than the Arkham air, began to seep into Batman's bones. He took another step, then another, until he was standing directly behind the seated man. He reached out a gloved hand, slowly, cautiously, and placed it on the thin shoulder. And then it happened. The man at the table began to laugh. It wasn't the laugh he knew. It wasn't the high, manic, soul-shredding cackle that haunted his nightmares. This was a different laugh. A normal laugh. A nervous, slightly bewildered. And beneath Batman's hand, the shoulder felt wrong. The man turned his head, and the face that looked up at him was not the one he expected. It was a pale, frightened man with thinning brown hair and wide, terrified eyes. A decoy. A nobody. Who are you? The man stammered, his face ashen. At that exact moment, the guard, Frank, let out a choked gasp from the hallway. Batman turned, his heart a cold stone in his chest. He looked through the barred window and saw Frank, pointing a trembling finger at the figure in the cell. But he wasn't pointing at the decoy. He was pointing at the face that was now pressed against the glass from the inside. A face that was a chalk-white mask of insanity. And then he began to laugh. That laugh. The real one. The one that sounded like sanity, tearing apart at the seams. It echoed down the long, sterile hallway. A sound of pure, unadulterated chaos. Batman moved faster than thought, slamming the cell door shut and turning back to the window. The Joker face guard was stumbling back, collapsing against the far wall, his laughter devolving into agonized, choking sobs. Reed and other orderlies were running down the hall, but Batman knew. He knew with the certainty that was as absolute as gravity. He was too late. The string had snapped. The Joker was out. And the joke was on him. Somewhere else, in the rain-lashed city, a different kind of story was unfolding. Not in a fortress of madness, but in a cramped, water-stained apartment that smelled of boiled cabbage and failure. Here, a young man stood in front of a cracked bathroom mirror, trying to force his lips into the shape of a smile. He was unremarkable, thin, with nervous eyes and a hairline that was already in full retreat. He wore a cheap, slightly too large suit that he'd probably bought for a wedding or a funeral years ago. He was a comedian, or at least he was trying to be. He took a deep breath, the air rattling in his lungs. So I go to the doctor and I say, "Doctor, it hurts when I do this." He raised his arm in a stiff, awkward gesture. He waited for a beat, his own reflection staring back at him with pity. And the doctor, he says, "Well, don't do that." The silence that followed was deafening. The joke fell completely flat, even to himself. He slumped against the sink, the cheap porcelain cold against his forehead. Failure was a taste in his mouth, a constant, metallic tang. He had a wife, a beautiful, wonderful wife named Jeannie, and she was pregnant. The thought of her, of the baby, was both his only source of light and the crushing weight that was driving him to this. He had to make it. He just had to. He had quit his steady, soul-crushing job at a chemical processing plant to pursue this dream. And now the dream was a nightmare of empty open mic nights and the polite, strained smiles of people who wished he would just get off the stage. Jeannie walked into the small bathroom, her presence immediately warming the cold, cramped space. She was radiant, even in her worn-out maternity dress, her belly a proud, hopeful curve. She put her arms around his thin frame from behind, resting her chin on his shoulder. "You were great," she whispered, her breath warm against his ear. "You weren't listening," he mumbled into the sink. "I was. So, you were practicing, and you're going to be wonderful tonight. I know it." He turned to face her, his eyes filled with a desperate, pleading love. "But what if I'm not, Jeannie? What if I'm just not funny? What if this was all a huge mistake? The baby's coming, and I don't have a job. I have punchlines, lousy ones." She silenced him with a gentle finger on his lips. "Don't say that. You are funny. You have a gift. It's just the world isn't ready for you yet, but it will be." Back in the present, the city held its breath. The escape from Arkham hadn't hit the news yet. It was a quiet, festering secret, known only to a handful of people. Commissioner James Gordon was one of them. He sat in his cramped office at the GCPD headquarters, the phone receiver still slick with sweat in his hand. Batman had called him. The two words, "He's out," had been enough to turn the commissioner's blood to ice. He looked out his window at the rain, at the city he had sworn to protect, A city that was now, once again, the unwilling playground of a madman. Gordon was a good man in a bad city. He was a rock of integrity in a sea of corruption. He had a mustache that seemed permanently grim and eyes that had seen far too much human misery. But he also had a hope, a stubborn belief in the law, in order, in the idea that things could be better, a belief personified by the dark, winged figure who was his ally, and, in a strange way, his friend. He trusted Batman. But the Joker was different. He wasn't a criminal. He was a force of nature, a plague. He took a sip of his cold coffee and looked at a framed picture on his desk. It was his daughter, Barbara. She was smiling, her red hair a vibrant splash of color in the drab office. She was brilliant, beautiful, and the best thing in his life. He'd just been on the phone with her, in fact. She was at home, working on some research for the library. He had promised to be home early, to help her sort through some old books. A wave of love and protectiveness washed over him. He had to keep her safe. He had to keep them all safe. The doorbell rang at Barbara Gordon's apartment. It was a pleasant, unassuming sound. She was in her living room, a comfortable space, filled with books and plants. A cup of herbal tea steaming on the coffee table. She was in her bathrobe, her glasses perched on her nose as she cross-referenced a thick cross. She smiled, thinking it was probably her father, having forgotten his keys again. "Just a minute, Dad," she called out, marking her page and heading for the door. She unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open, a cheerful greeting already on her lips. And the world ended. Standing in the doorway was a nightmare. He was wearing a garish purple suit, a stringy green tie, and a hideous Hawaiian shirt. His face was a white smear. His lips, a bloody gash of a smile. His green hair was wild, unkempt. It was him, the Joker. He held a long-barreled revolver in one hand and a cheap tourist camera in the other. Barbara's greeting died in her throat. Her mind, usually so quick and analytical, went completely blank. There was only shock, cold and absolute. The Joker's grin widened, if such a thing were possible. "Evening, Commissioner," he said, his voice a playful, sing-song lilt that was utterly terrifying. Oh, wait. You're not the commissioner. You're his daughter. Well, I'll just have to give him my message through you. He raised the gun. The sound was deafening in the small apartment hallway. A flash of white, hot fire. A sickening, wet impact. Barbara was thrown backward, as if by a giant, invisible hand. The book she was holding flew from her grasp, its pages fluttering down around her like dying birds. She landed in a heap on the floor, a spreading crimson stain on her white bathrobe. The pain was unimaginable, a supernova of agony centered in her spine. She couldn't feel her legs. She couldn't breathe. Her vision swam, the edges turning dark. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her was the Joker leaning over her, his manic grin filling her world, and the blinding, repeated flash of the camera's bulb. Click, click, click. He was documenting her agony, turning her life's worst moment into a souvenir. Commissioner Gordon arrived home an hour later. The rain had finally let up, leaving the air washed, clean and cold. He was tired, but he was looking forward to a quiet evening with Barbara. He saw the apartment door was ajar, and a flicker of irritation went through him. He was always telling her to be more careful. He pushed the door open. "Babs? You in here?" And then he saw it. The overturned table, the shattered teacup, the scattered books, and her lying on the floor in a pool of blood, her eyes open but unseeing. The world tilted on its axis. Time seemed to stop. A sound came from his throat. A raw, animal noise of pure anguish. He stumbled forward, falling to his knees beside her, his hands hovering over her, afraid to touch, afraid to confirm what his eyes were telling him. He didn't see the two hulking, clown-faced goons step out from the kitchen behind him until one of them brought a heavy object down on the back of his head. The world exploded in a flash of white, and then there was only blackness. When Gordon woke up, he was in hell. The air was thick with the smell of popcorn, cheap candy, and decay. He was stripped to his underwear, strapped into the seat of a tiny, brightly colored car on some kind of funhouse ride. The place was an abandoned amusement park. Rusting rides loomed like skeletal dinosaurs against the night sky. Creepy, calliope music, slightly off-key, drifted from somewhere in the darkness, a soundtrack for a madman's dream. His head throbbed, and his heart felt like a lead weight in his chest. Barbara. Oh God. Barbara. He didn't know if she was alive or dead, and the not knowing was a special kind of torture. The little car lurched forward, plunging him into a dark tunnel, and the show began. Large screens flickered to life on either side of him, and on them, in grotesque, oversized detail, were the photographs. The photographs the Joker had taken. He saw his daughter. He saw the surprise on her face turn to terror. He saw the gun. He saw the flash. He saw her on the floor, bleeding, broken. Over and over again, the images assaulted him, blown up, distorted, a relentless slideshow of his worst nightmare. A voice echoed through the tunnel, piped in through hidden speakers. It was the Joker. "All it takes is one bad day," the voice crooned, oozing with false sympathy. "One bad day to reduce the sanest man alive to lunacy. That's how far the world is from where I am. Just one bad day." The car moved on, past bizarre, leering animatronics of clowns and freaks, all of them chanting in high, distorted voices. "One bad day. One bad day. You had a bad day once, am I right?" The Joker's voice continued, a mock, confidential whisper. "I know I am. I can tell. You had a bad day and everything changed. Why else would you dress up as a flying rat? You had a bad day and it drove you crazy, but you won't admit it. You have to keep pretending that life..." Gordon squeezed his eyes shut, but the images were burned onto the inside of his eyelids. He tried to block out the voice, but it was inside his head, a worm of insanity burrowing into his brain. He felt his reason begin to fray. He felt the edges of his world, the solid, dependable world of law and order, begin to crumble. "I'm not a monster," the voice whispered. "I'm just ahead of the curve. I'm here to prove a point about the fallibility of sanity. And you, my dear Commissioner, are my star pupil. I'm going to prove that deep down, everyone is as crazy as I am. Even you. All it takes is one little push." The car finally emerged from the tunnel and came to a stop in a large, circus-like arena. In the center, on a makeshift throne of broken ride parts and garbage, sat the Joker. He was flanked by his goons, a collection of misshapen freaks and giggling psychopaths. He applauded slowly as Gordon's car came to a halt. "Bravo! Bravo!" he shrieked with glee. "Did you enjoy the show, Commish? I call it the agony of the common man. It's a work in progress." Gordon stared at him, his face a mask of cold fury. His mind was a maelstrom of grief and rage, but on the surface, he was ice. He would not break. He would not give this monster the satisfaction. "Where is she?" Gordon growled, his voice raw. The Joker pouted, a grotesque pantomime of sadness. "Oh, her. The message. Don't you worry. She's being looked after. The point, Jimmy, the point isn't about her. It's about you. It's about what this does to you. Do you feel it yet? The little thread of sense snapping in your head. The world dissolving into one big, black, horrible joke. Don't you get the punchline yet?" He stood up and began to sing, a horrible, off-key music hall number, tap dancing around Gordon's car. His freaks joined in, a chorus of the damned. Gordon just sat there, strapped into his little car, a sane man in a world gone completely mad, holding on to his reason by a single, desperate thread. And in another time, another place, the comedian was having his own bad day. He was sitting in the back room of the dingy bar, the one where he'd met the two criminals. He was wearing his cheap suit. On a table in front of him was the helmet. It was smooth, featureless, and blood red. The Red Hood. He was supposed to put it on, lead the two men through the Ace chemical plant, where he used to work, using a service corridor he knew about. They would rob the playing card company next door and be gone. They had assured him it was foolproof. They had given him a down payment, enough to pay the rent, to buy things for the baby. He felt sick to his stomach. This wasn't him. He wasn't a criminal. He was a comedian, a husband, a father-to-be. What was he doing? Just then, two policemen walked into the bar. His blood ran cold. They'd found out. It was over. But they didn't look at him. They walked over to the bartender, their faces grim. They spoke in low tones. The comedian strained to hear. He caught fragments. Freak accident. Testing an infant formula warmer. Shorted out. Electrocuted. And then he heard the name. His wife's name. Jeannie. The world dropped out from under him. A roaring sound filled his ears. It couldn't be. Not Jeannie. Not their baby. He stood up, his legs shaking, and stumbled over to the policeman. My wife, he managed to choke out. One of the cops looked at him with something resembling pity. I'm sorry, son. There was nothing anyone could do. She's gone. Gone. The word was so small, so simple, yet it contained an entire universe of peril. The larger of the two men grabbed him by the collar, his knuckles white. The hell you're not. We're hitting that plant tonight. We need a Red Hood, and you're it. We don't care about your sob story. Everyone's got problems. They shoved him back into his chair. They told him to think about the money. What money? What was the point of money now? Jeannie was gone. There was nothing left. A dull, empty numbness settled over him. He felt hollowed out, a shell. He looked at the red helmet on the table. It stared back at him, a blank, crimson face. It didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered. Meanwhile, Batman was tearing his city apart, looking for Gordon. He had found Barbara. The paramedics were already there, a frantic, desperate ballet of life-saving under the flashing red and blue lights. He had arrived to a scene of quiet horror. He saw her on the stretcher, pale and still, a breathing mask over her face. He spoke to a young officer, his voice barely a whisper. Will she? The officer shook his head, not meeting the dark night's gaze. The bullet lodged in her spine. They don't think she'll ever walk again. Rage, cold and pure, surged through Batman. This was a line that had been crossed. This wasn't a game anymore. This was personal. He found a single Joker brand playing card on the floor near Barbara. On the back was a crudely drawn map, an invitation. He knew where he had to go. The old, condemned amusement park by the pier. a place of fake joy and real decay, a fitting stage for the Joker's grand finale. He drove through the city, the Batmobile, a black arrow of vengeance. He ignored the police radios crackling with panicked reports. This was between him and the Joker now. The rain started again, as if the sky itself were weeping for the city's sins. He thought about the conversation he'd tried to have only a few hours ago. The offer of help, of rehabilitation. How naive it seemed now. How utterly pointless. Reed, the warden at Arkham, had been right. He was beyond help. He was a cancer that needed to be cut out. The thought was a dangerous one, a dark whisper in the back of his mind, the one line he had sworn never to cross. But tonight he felt himself being pushed toward it. Just one bad day. The Joker's words echoed in his own mind. Was he having his? He arrived at the amusement park, the main gate. A grinning, peeling clown face hung open like a scream. He left the car and proceeded on foot, melting into the shadows of the derelict rides. He could hear the music, the insane, off-key calliope tune, and he could hear laughter. He moved with a predator's silence, a ghost in the ghost town. He found them in the central plaza. Gordon, pale and shivering, strapped into the funhouse car. The Joker, prancing and singing on his throne of trash. The freaks, a grotesque audience, clapping and hooting. And that's how it is in the real world, the Joker was singing, kicking his heels up. You're just a joke, a mess of puke and smoke. And there's no happy ending in the book. Joker. The name, spoken in that low, terrifying growl, cut through the music and laughter. Everything stopped. Every head turned toward the shadows from which the voice had come. And then he emerged, a figure of pure tisk tisk, always so dramatic, the Joker chided, wagging a finger. No, I don't think I will. You see, he's the control group. I've shown him the truth. I've peeled back the flimsy curtain of reality. And and shown him the screaming, chaotic void beneath. Any second now, he's going to snap like a stale breadstick. Batman started walking forward, a slow, deliberate, unstoppable advance. The freaks and goons between them hesitated, then scattered like rats as he approached. "He's a good man," Batman said, his eyes never leaving the Joker's. "He's seen the worst of this world, and it hasn't broken him. You can't break him." "Oh, I think I can." The Joker giggled. "After all, I broke me. It wasn't hard." He gestured around at the decaying park. "Memories can be sad, can't they? In this old place, it brings them flooding back." And as Batman advanced, the world seemed to shift, to blur. And we are back with the comedian years ago. On the worst night of his life, they shoved him into the back of a van. They drove him to the Ace chemical plant. The rain was hammering down, just like it was tonight. They made him put on the helmet. It was heavy, and it smelled of old plastic and sweat. It sealed him in, the world becoming a narrow slit of red-tinted reality. He was the Red Hood. A name, costume, for a man who no longer had an identity. They moved through the plant, the familiar gantries and vats, looking alien and threatening through the helmet's eye slits. The plan was going smoothly, too smoothly. And then, of course, it all went wrong. A security guard saw them. Alarms began to shriek. A deafening klaxon that echoed the screaming in his own head. The two criminals opened fire. The guard went down. And then, from the shadows, on a high catwalk, a figure dropped down. A bat. A giant, terrifying bat creature. His two accomplices were taken down in a blur of motion, with brutal, efficient violence. He was left alone, cornered on a gantry, high above a churning vat of bubbling green-white chemicals. His two accomplices were taken down in a blur of motion, with brutal, efficient violence. He was left alone, cornered on a gantry, high above a churning vat of bubbling green-white chemicals. The bat creature was advancing on him, "It wasn't me," he screamed, his voice muffled and distorted by the helmet. "They made me do it. My wife and baby, they're dead." He was babbling, hysterical, a man at the absolute end of his rope. The dark figure didn't seem to hear him, or didn't care. It kept coming. Panicked, he fired his gun. A wild, unaimed shot that ricocheted off a pipe. The creature lunged. He stumbled backward, his heel catching on the railing. He teetered there for a heart-stopping second, arms flailing. And then he fell. He fell into the chemicals. The world became a torrent of searing, unimaginable pain. It was in his eyes, his mouth, his lungs. It felt like it was dissolving him, unmaking him from the inside out. He was pushed by a current toward an effluent pipe that led outside the plant into the river. He clawed his way to the bank, gasping, choking, his body a symphony of agony. The Joker was born. Back at the amusement park, Batman had reached the throne. He threw a single, powerful punch that sent the Joker flying. The clown landed in a heap, but came up. Attaboy, Batsy. A little roughhousing is just what the doctor ordered. He pulled a knife and lunged. The fight was a blur of black and purple. It wasn't a graceful martial arts display. It was a brawl. Ugly, desperate, and personal. They crashed through funhouse mirrors, their reflections shattering into 1,000 fractured images of their conflict. They fought in a tunnel of love, the boat drifting past leering, romantic caricatures as they tried to kill each other. You see, the Joker, as Batman held him in a chokehold, there's no difference between me and everyone else. All it takes is one bad day. Batman slammed him against a wall. No, he... His face inches from the Joker's. I had a bad day too. A very bad day. It changed my life, but it didn't destroy me. It didn't make me a monster. He finally subdued the Joker, but the park itself seemed to be the clown's final weapon. A distorted, animatronic face of a fat lady began to and a hidden trap door opened beneath Batman's feet. He fell into darkness, landing hard in a surreal, distorted parody of a living room. The Joker appeared on a television screen. You just don't get it, do you? There's no sanity clause. So why aren't you laughing? Batman, bruised and weary, looked around the crooked room. He saw a hat stand, a telephone, a fireplace, and it hit him. Not a memory, an idea, a recognition of the pattern. He remembered the Joker's very first crime. A series of seemingly random theatrical acts. The laughing fish, the poisoned reservoirs. They seemed like chaos, but looking back, there was always a perverse logic, a theme. Tonight's theme was madness, and its source. He smashed his way out of the room and back into the main arena. The Joker was standing over Commissioner Gordon, holding a gun to his head. "Time's up!" The Joker cackled. "Time for the final punchline. Say goodbye, Jimmy." "No," a voice said. It wasn't Batman's. It was Gordon's. He was looking up at the Joker, his eyes clear and sane, filled not with fear, but with a cold, righteous anger. "I'm not broken. You failed." The Joker stared at him, his grin faltering for the first time all night. He looked genuinely confused. "What?" "But the pictures, the laughing, you're supposed to be gibbering. You think a few pictures can break me?" Gordon said, his voice gaining strength. "You think you're the first monster I've ever seen? This city is full of them, but it's also full of good people. People who fight back. People who don't give in to the darkness." He looked past the Joker, at the shadows where Batman was now standing. "And we have to show him. We have to show him that our way works. We have to bring him in by the book. The Joker looked from Gordon to Batman, his confusion turning to rage. By the book? By the book, you old fool. There is no book. The world is a madhouse. He raised the gun to shoot Gordon, but Batman was already moving. He disarmed the Joker with a single, precise movement. The Joker, defeated, weaponless, simply began to laugh again. Not a triumphant laugh, but a weak, wheezing chuckle of utter defeat. You really are incorruptible, aren't you? He gasped at Gordon. Well, where's the fun in that? The police arrived then, their sirens cutting through the night. They took a shivering but unbroken James Gordon and wrapped him in a blanket. They took the freaks and the goons into custody. The nightmare was over. Batman stood with the Joker in the pouring rain, away from the flashing lights. The amusement park was silent now, a sad, wet monument to madness. It's over, Batman said. The Joker just smiled his terrible smile. Is it? It'll never be over. Not between us. I told you before, Batman said, his voice heavy with a weariness that went beyond the physical. I want to help you. It doesn't have to end with one of us dead. The Joker looked at him, and for a fleeting instant, a flicker of something other than madness crossed his face. A flicker of sadness, of regret. No, he said, his voice quiet. I'm sorry, but no. It's too late for that. Far too late. He was silent for a long moment, the rain plastering his green hair to his white face. You know, he said conversationally, it's funny. It reminds me of a joke. Batman waited. See, there were these two guys in a lunatic asylum, the Joker began, his voice taking on the cadence of a practiced storyteller. And one night they decide they don't like living in an asylum anymore. They decide they're going to escape. So they get up onto the roof, and they see the rooftops of the town stretching away in the moonlight, stretching to freedom. Now, the first guy, he jumps right across to the next roof. No problem. But his friend doesn't dare make the leap. He's afraid of falling. He paused. A small, escaping his lips. So, the first guy, he has an idea. He says, "Hey, I've got my flashlight with me. I'll shine it across the gap between the buildings. You can walk along the beam and join me." The Joker looked up at Batman, his eyes gleaming in the rain. But the second guy, he just shakes his head. He says, "What do you think I am? Crazy? You'll just turn it off when I'm halfway across." He finished the joke, and then he started to laugh. It started as a chuckle, then grew into a full-throated, helpless, agonizing laugh. It was the laugh of a man who understood the punchline of his own life all too well. And then the impossible happened. Batman, the grim avenger, the creature of the night, began to laugh too. It started as a low rumble in his chest, a sound no one had heard from him in years, if ever. It grew, joining the Joker's manic cackle. The two of them stood there, in the pouring rain, amidst the wreckage of the Joker's madness. The hero and the villain, sharing a joke. Two men on two different rooftops, with a chasm of insanity between them, and a beam of light that could never be trusted. They laughed and laughed as the police car's lights flashed on their faces, red and blue, red and blue. Their laughter echoed through the desolate amusement park. Two sides of the same broken coin. Two inmates of the same mad city. The laughter continued, raw and unhinged, as the rain washed the world clean. And then, slowly, horribly, one of the laughs faded away, leaving only the sound of the rain. And that, my dear listeners, is where our story ends for tonight. In the rain, with a joke, a shared moment of impossible understanding in a world that makes no sense. It leaves one to wonder, doesn't it? Who is truly the madman on the roof? The one who offers the beam of light? or the one who knows it's just an illusion? Ponder that as you drift off. Let the shadows take you. Until next time, sleep well, if you can. This has been Uncle Grim. Good night.